Welcome to SDG Live. I'm Kathy Calvin, and I'm the president and the CEO of the United Nations Foundation. We were founded 20 years ago by Ted Turner, who thought it was time to put his money where his mouth was and support the UN as the institution that he thought could do the most good to take the world out of danger of nuclear war and also lift people out of poverty into prosperity. And for 20 years, we've been working to make sure women have a chance to move forward, that communities are healthier, that everyone has the opportunity to shape and control their lives. And there's probably been no better partner for the UN Foundation during that period than the Gates Foundation, which was founded just after Ted Turner came to create the UN Foundation. So I'm so happy today that we're celebrating that moment here in Davos as we look at the progress made over the last 20 years, but more importantly, the challenges ahead for the next 20. And I'm here with Mark Suzman, who's the President and Chief Strategy Officer of the Gates Foundation. He's a former UN employee and a native of South Africa. And Mark, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Great to be here.
I hope you're standing, not slipping and falling in the snow here.
There's a little bit of skidding here and there, but no, it's been great.
Well, and we're moving forward. Last night you all hosted a very important event called Gold Keepers. Can you explain what you mean by Gold Keepers as we think about these important sustainable development goals?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're trying to do is sort of capture, if you like, both a spirit, which is around these goals, these 17 sustainable development goals are actually a commitment that every country in the world, every government in the world made to their citizens. They're real, and they're something that affect all of us. And so from the Gates Foundation, while we focus on a specific subset of some of these goals, particularly in areas like health and agriculture and poverty reduction, this is a platform that is relevant for every person on the planet, and these are goals we need to keep. And so by hosting this event and reception, and this is just something that we want to have a sort of drumbeat running through events like this, the UN at country level, we're all goal keepers in some way, and we want to try and provide a platform so that everyone can contribute in their own particular way.
That's great. And you know, the goals themselves really encompass the span of our lives, don't they? From our health to our education to our ability to live well in our communities and take care of our land. They really cover everything. But under them are some principles having to do with universality and interrelatedness and leaving no one behind. Can you talk a little bit about the leaving no one behind concept and how you all at Gates think about that one?
Yeah, in some ways, as that's the one that connects sort of most viscerally to the mission of the Gates Foundation. We are a foundation whose founders set us up with a simple vision that every human life has equal value and every person deserves the chance to a healthy and productive life. And we believe that those values are at the heart of the SDGs, but particularly for that still nearly 1 billion people who are really at the bottom, who live on $1.25 a day or less, who don't have the resources to feed themselves or their children, who don't have access to proper health care, who don't have access to full education and quality education. And it's not because these are not hardworking, entrepreneurial people all over the world, but particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where we do the bulk of our work. It's because they haven't been given the tools and the opportunities to take advantage of that. And so for us, the leave no one behind message is that one central element, while these goals are universal, and we hope that every person on the planet feels touched by them and can feel the quality of their life improved by them, if we haven't, as a part and parcel of that, made sure that that last portion of humanity that really is dealing with extreme poverty and preventable death and a range of the other things, if we don't tackle that and stop that and end that by 2030, which the world is completely capable of doing, we will have failed with the wider mission. So we need to connect the two together.
Well, and your boss, Bill Gates, has said we can end poverty by 2030. What gives him that confidence?
Well, Bill and Melinda like to call themselves impatient optimists, and even impatient optimists get tested by reality now and again. But what we've seen, and what people tend to forget, is the last 15 years, or now 17 years, but the 15 years of the Millennium Development Goals actually represented in absolute terms the greatest amount of progress for humanity in terms of poverty reduction, health improvement, access to education, and a range of other similar measures that has ever happened. And even though that included the period of the Great Recession. And so we know that this kind of progress is possible. people tend to be skeptical. One of our big problems is actually persuading people, because when they look in the mirror, they often are conscious of what's going wrong rather than what's going right. But we're incredibly optimistic this is possible. But one of the biggest enemies is a mixture of complacency and defeatism. One is, we have too many problems, we're not going to be able to do it. And I think one of the goals of the Gates Foundation, something that Bill and Melinda feel very passionately about, is if we make the right investments, but it does require investments, and it requires political energy, and it requires attention, and it requires citizen activism. But if all of that can come together, absolutely, we can eradicate poverty and meet a whole range of these other goals as well.
Yeah, I've read recently someone say this is the best time to be alive, because we've reduced mortality of children, we've reduced mortality of mothers, we're taking better care of the planet, but we have a long way to go. So I guess it's that we have to keep both things in our heads.
Yeah, and we need to be conscious. So it's, if you look at an abstract term and you say, if you know you're going to be born and you have no idea what gender, what race, what ethnicity, what geography, where you were going to be born, and when in human history would you like to be born, you would say now, right, because the odds are you would be born in a place that gives you those opportunities is higher than any time in human history. But at the same time, we're very conscious. I was talking about extreme poverty, but we also know there's been a huge upsurge in sort of internal civil conflicts recently, tragedies like Yemen and South Sudan. We have refugee crises. There are many genuine global concerns which need to be addressed in real time. And so we need to be conscious and sensitive about that, and that there are real challenges, and that's part of what creates some of the, sometimes the gloom and the pessimism. And we need to acknowledge that, address it, but also be optimistic about progress is not only possible, it's happening, and we can accelerate it.
And it's essential.
And it's essential.
So I happen to have been born a woman, or a girl, and today it's probably better to be born female than it's been ever in the history, just everything you're saying. But we've got a long way to go, and your foundation has put a priority on using a gender lens on everything you do. Agriculture, health, you name it. Where does that come from, and what's the impact of using a gender lens?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Melinda Gates likes to say that when she and Bill started the foundation, she never thought that she was going to become a gender activist. You know, our goals were simple. We were looking to address global health challenges. Why were babies dying of preventable diseases? We were focusing a lot on research and development to look at diseases that disproportionately affect the poor. Malaria affects boys and girls, men and women. So does HIV, so does tuberculosis, so do a range of the other things we work on. So we didn't think we needed a gender lens. We thought these were just global public goods. And then the more our work continued, the more we saw actually, if you take something like HIV, right now the age group that has the fastest growing infection rate are 16 to 24-year-old girls and women. And you need to understand there are a whole bunch of sociological reasons behind that, to do with poor women who often need money, who are abused by older men, etc. But if you don't acknowledge that and tackle that, you can't just have an HIV prevention strategy that's generic. It's something that needs to really target women and girls. Similarly, if you look at something like agriculture, we thought if we provided public goods and you provided better crops that will grow better and need less irrigation, or you provide better credit services, somehow that would work. But when you look at it and you realize that actually over 50% of labor on farmers in rural areas, and 70% of those very poorest people I was talking about, the $1.25 a day or less, live in rural areas and so are dependent on these farms. 50% of them are women. They have access to smaller plots of land. They're less likely to get credit. They have less time available to farm because they tend to have a disproportionate number of household chores. They don't get extension services. They're less likely to have land tenure. So once you start adding that up, you realize there is no possible way we can meet our abstract goals around poverty reduction or agricultural productivity unless you take a deliberate focus on why are those challenges facing women and how can we make sure we are directly addressing them. What is the way to make sure that a woman has access to credit or gets that training or empowerment? And so that's been the journey we're on, and now it's a fundamental part of who we are and what we do, because we realize that is true across just about everywhere we work. You need that intentional gender lens, both because it's important in itself, but because that's going to be the critical platform that enables us to meet all those SDGs.
Well, Mark, I hope that message is being heard widely around Davos this week. There aren't enough women here, but there are a lot of gender champions, and you're certainly one of them, and we thank you for all the work you're doing and look forward to a healthy effort to get to 2030.
Great. No, well, thank you. And yes, I think one of the encouraging things about this Davos is there are more champions, there is more discussion, there is more attention, but we have to turn that attention into action and implementation. That's the shift, and that's what we need to all be held accountable to.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you all for joining us today.